Let the movie speak.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back. We are super happy to be with you on this blustery summer evening.
Oh my!
Is it blustery?
I need to look up the definition of blustery. That sounds windy to me.
I don't care. Anyway, we're coming to you in episode 7 of our 3rd season. This is our series on the 1940s. And last week, we recorded a whopper of an episode on A Matter of Life and Death. I'm still recovering. That movie has a lot in it, Justin.
It's got zoodles in it, man.
Zoodles.
It's out there like space aliens.
Yes. In this movie today, we're bringing you 1948's Bicycle Thieves. This is one of those movies that just like it seems to pop up on every kind of list. Best film ever.
Right.
Best film of the 40s, honorary Oscar in 49. There's a lot of critical acclaim for this little Italian movie. And I'd never seen it before. And I think we're going to have an interesting conversation, Justin.
Yeah, I no doubt we are, my friend. Because of its illustrious reputation, I was super excited to see this and just kind of assumed it was going to be completely amazing. Blow your socks off, blow the pizza pie right out the roof.
Yeah.
But
You still wearing your socks?
Yeah, the pizza never left my hands. It just went into my mouth.
Yeah. Well, that's where it's supposed to go. And
okay.
Socks still firmly in place. So we'll get around to why the socks are still there, why the pizza didn't end up on the roof, a la Breaking Bad. And before we get to The Bicycle Thief, or Bicycle Thieves, as it's originally titled, let's talk to him about what we watched this week. Justin, what did you watch this week?
My friend, I watched Ip Man, the movie. I did not watch the true man himself, Ip Man of yore. He has been dead quite a while, so I did not see him.
Is Ip Man? Is it that movie about the killer clown?
No, that is It Man, which is a knockoff of It.
Got it.
And it's weird, and we probably don't want to get into it, but just safe to say that was the last movie Cheetos ever sponsored.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so Ip Man anyway is a 2008 movie featuring Donnie Yen as Ip Man, who is who was a master practitioner of Wing Chun, which is kind of a sub-discipline, if you will, of Kung Fu. And Ip Man was actually one who taught Bruce Lee himself. So kind of a big deal in the martial arts world, and certainly still in the East. Anyway, so this movie, while taking some liberties with the facts, is ostensibly about Ip Man in the years leading up to the the Japanese invasion of China during World War II, and how he and his family sort of survived during that. So this is it's a phenomenal movie. I'd just like to get out there. If you don't know, listeners, there's a few other movies in this series. I haven't seen any of those. They've been very popular, at least financially, if not critically. This movie it delivers as a movie. Okay, so I enjoy martial arts choreography so much that probably more than any other genre, my bias is if there's good martial arts choreography, I'll probably sit through it even if it's just insane. Like
you give some latitude there.
Yeah, I do, and I recognize that bias. But this is just a good movie that also happens to have some really stellar choreography. It has a heart. This is really a movie about how does a man, still provide for his family? How does a man still hold his integrity? How does a man survive? And I'm using man in a general sense, not because it's all about males, but just because this is English. And how does a man, hold his head up high even when even when the world is kind of oppressing him, and what gives humans dignity? Which actually, I'm saying this, Travis. It sounds like we're gonna talk about Bicycle Thieves, but no,
Yeah.
I'm talking about It Man. And I think this movie really delivers in giving a really it earns the affirmation that it gives the audience. I think for what it means to be human, for what's worth fighting for. Is there a right and wrong? It just, I think it has really, really interesting points to make about morality, and you just get to have some awesome, kung fu action along the way. I kind of take this as, Travis, you recently watched Cliff Walkers.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like the same exact time period.
And so I feel like China is, and Hong Kong, and, just that whole, the Asian market, for a very broad and general brushstroke, at least when we're talking about cinema, the Asian market is really kind of in a golden age, I think, now, for having access to technology that makes their movies visually every bit as good as, a blockbuster in the U.S. or elsewhere. But I say golden age because the content is still... how do I say this without sounding prudish, Travis? Because I'm not trying to be a Puritan or something. But by the way, listeners, I think the Puritans were actually pretty cool. And they get a bad rap.
The Puritans, the coolest of all the people.
It Man deals with some really heavy stuff, and there's some bloody stuff that happens, but it's done with a lot of restraint.
Yeah.
And so and the beats that this story hits, like it tries to do, like just a movie done well, hits multiple notes, right? Yeah. It's a drama, but hey, maybe there are a couple jokes in there that really land and are earned. There's some sad stuff, blah, blah, it just runs a gamut. And this movie does that, and I feel like that's not where we are right now in America any longer with movies and with our blockbusters. They're very, I think we're getting, maybe detrimentally so, we're kind of pigeonholing ourselves. So for it, to bring up another movie that you mentioned a little while ago, Travis, for as freaking incredible as I don't know, what's a good example? Minari is, it doesn't hit all the notes that a movie like this does. I don't say that as a criticism against, I'm not trying to be unfair to that movie, okay? Because you've reported that it's like freaking outstanding. Yeah. So I'm not at all trying to take away from that. I think you can still have an outstanding movie that is very genre specific or very, maybe it only hits one or two notes. That's okay. Sure. I think you can do that. I am just noting that at least in the American market, a lot of what we get is it's not very diversified in terms of tone. Mm-hmm. When you go to see a Star Wars movie, you kind of know what you're getting, right? Probably not getting a lot of philosophical underpinnings. That'd be great if that would change with whoever's going to do the next Star Wars movie. I don't think we really... and, well, I'm not trying to set us up for another argument about The Last Jedi, Travis.
Let's
I promise.
do it.
But,
ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. But, or the Marvel movies, or, just the blockbusters here now. I guess blockbuster is probably a better word than me bringing up Minari. But the blockbusters are they're not what they used to be in terms of, what they delivered tonally and story-wise for an audience. On the other hand, I think things like Ip Man prove that China is kind of, or Hong Kong in this case, is in a different place of storytelling, where they feel like they have the latitude to, let's do a martial arts movie, but we're going to take this stuff freaking seriously, because this was about a real guy who is kind of a hero, in real life. So let's do him a service. So anyway, apologize if that's too much rambling, Travis, but I really enjoyed it and would recommend it to anyone.
Cool. So I think you bring up some interesting points that I think we at least both of us think about often when we're watching movies. One of them is that idea of like a movie that's one note, right? Like great movies can do one thing and do them really well. Some of the best movies, in my opinion, they kind of scoop in a few things and straddle them all really well, or juggle them in an interesting way. It sounds like that's more like what Ip Man accomplishes. What did I watch this week? It's technically a couple weeks old, but that's fine. I was invited, as were both of us, and only I was able to make it to this recording. So I went in as
I had a funeral.
I went in as an emissary for Let the Movie Speak, to a sister podcast and a show that's not too dissimilar from our own. The super gracious and welcoming hosts of Three Films and a Podcast invited me over to talk about Barry Lyndon, which is a Stanley Kubrick film that I hadn't seen before. I've seen a bunch of Kubrick. Justin, I think you've probably seen a bit. And there's a lot to like in a lot of Kubrick's filmmaking. There's a very specific craft and flavor to what you get from him. Just to give people some context, my favorite Kubrick stuff that I've seen, my favorite Kubrick is Full Metal Jacket, but then I really like Dr. Strangelove as well, which is not at all the same movie. But both of them kind of attacking the idea of like warfare and, human life, and what do we do to play games with that on a big scale, or what do we do to value it and protect it? And Kubrick is not like a warm and fuzzy guy by any stretch of the imagination. He's been accused of being a beautiful technician, but kind of cold and clinical in his storytelling. And that kind of holds true with Barry Lyndon. It's a 3-hour kind of epic drama of a guy who falls into the Kubrick mold of a protagonist who's not a great dude who you spend a lot of time with. And for that reason, Barry Lyndon is not really a fun movie to watch, especially at 3 hours, but it is gorgeous. It is crafted with the same level of skill and just utter genius that 2001: A Space Odyssey or The Shining or any of the Kubrick stuff that you can think of is. It's just visually, it's on another level. You cannot compete with Kubrick's ideas and execution. They're just epic. For one example, Justin, one of his quests in Barry Lyndon was to make this, it's a novel adaptation of a novel that was like, well regarded, but not some it wasn't Gone with the Wind. It wasn't selling like hotcakes like that. But he was like, I'm going to make this period piece. This is like Revolutionary War, post-Revolutionary War, kind of late Revolutionary War era. And it is all natural light. So we've seen this in recent years, right? I think The Revenant also pulled that off.
Right.
But this is a long time ago. This is like, the early 70s or whatever. And there's no light bulbs used in the production of this movie. It's just candlelight, daylight, and creative windows and stuff. So there's some stuff in there that you look at and you're like, holy cow. Like how did he make like every shot look like an oil painting with no like ability to control movie lighting? So some impressive stuff in there, but overall as a story, the stuff we care about on this show, right, it's like, what's it saying? Is it worth your time? Would you rewatch it? It's just a sad story of a guy who is pride obsessed and has a big fall for 3 hours and ends up and wallowing in his own decision making. A story that can be told really well, but certainly isn't all that enjoyable. So yeah, if you're a Kubrick completist, I think Barry Lyndon is worth your time. But if you're kind of a casual fan of Kubrick or have really liked one or two things, if you love Strangelove and not a lot else, you probably won't love Barry Lyndon. There's just a lot of powdered wigs and tricorn hats and sad people. But check out that episode of Three Films and a Podcast where I sit around and try not to make a fool of myself. So that's what I got, Justin. And speaking of one-note films, I think it's time we talked about Bicycle Thieves. What do you think?
Pedal, pedal.
All right, so again, we mentioned this at the top of the segment, but this movie is so loved. Everybody who is supposed to matter in film criticism says this thing is the greatest. It's the beginning of the Italian neo-realism movement and all these film nerdery kind of things. But this came out in 1948, and it's obviously a post-war movie, an Italian film. It's directed by Vittorio De Sica, who was pretty prolific. He did a lot of Italian films back in that era, and I don't know that it got as much. It kind of had that Renaissance thing where it was kind of well received when it came out, but now everybody looks at it like I would say like on the level of like M or The Great Dictator or any of those other movies that we've already covered. I've never heard anything but amazing things about this, so I had a pretty high bar, pretty high expectations. Justin, what about you?
Yeah, man, I just assumed we were walking into another masterpiece that, I just hadn't seen yet. So I wouldn't say, I sat down thinking like this is going to be the greatest movie ever, because you're probably going to set yourself up for failure most of the time with those kind of expectations. But I definitely did not expect what I saw.
Okay.
So I was encouraged that that in talking to you before we started rolling that we might have similar. If not necessarily exact, but I was glad. I thought I was going to be the odd man out of the world, but maybe we will be the two odd men out of the universe.
Yeah, I think there's a. I mean, I don't know. It's almost like the situation, right, where this movie is like it's held up next to The Godfather and next to Psycho and next to like all these movies that broke like immense ground in filmmaking and storytelling in this form, and it's almost a situation where like are people afraid to just say like this is not that great? Like, I mean,
right.
I don't think this is a bad movie, and we'll get to the reasons why, but I walked into this thinking I'm ready to add like a trophy on my wall of I've seen one of the greatest films of all time, and I definitely didn't leave feeling like I had. This story is just so singular. It is so condensed. One thing I'll say about it's not overly long. It's like an hour and 29 minutes, so that's merciful. If this was a 2-hour movie, I'd probably be like more upset about it, more than anything. I think we're going to find through our discussion of the characters and sequences and the way it's put together that it just kind of bangs the same drum over and over.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's get into it. That was our wonderful, thorough, beautiful intro. Well, I mean, honestly, there's not much to say, right? The director's prolific. Everybody else who's in it is not some big name, even in the Italian film industry. It's a lot of actors who are like first time, kind of still rookies.
A lot of non-actors, right?
A lot of non-actors, yeah.
And I think that if you're not familiar with this movie, if you're not familiar with this movie like us, and you came in expecting, something that was really worthy of all its amazing amounts of praise, you might be surprised to find non-actors who are not doing. I didn't see anyone's performance in this and go like, ugh, gross,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I rarely, although there are moments, I didn't see a lot of like, wow, that was, oh my goodness, how compelling. Because they're non-actors, it's like, it's not fair, right? You shouldn't, I'm not going to compare these people with some of the greatest of all time. It's not fair to them or to anyone else.
Yeah, the director made a point to use non-professionals, to use amateurs, essentially. And
right.
that was kind of, I think, a movement in this Italian neo-realist. That's what we call it now. Basically, what it is like post-war Italian films that are about this idea of, being impoverished, and that like if wealth were more evenly distributed, things would be better. That's just like what this whole movement is built off of. And this isn't really a gimmick. It was just common for especially Italian directors to utilize that tactic.
Right. And so what's also interesting beyond just that there's these actors, at least when they did this movie, being in this movie, is that all the dialogue is ADR. So it's recorded after the fact. And in some cases, if not all, I couldn't really find a definitive answer for how much. But some of these it's not even the voice of the actor that you're seeing on the screen.
Sure.
So it leads for some, it looks like a dubbed movie sometimes. So I don't know how you can honestly, like you said, Travis, neither of us are like technical Nazis or like that. That's not our wheelhouse. Nazis makes it sound like it's a bad thing, but we're that's just not like, while we can appreciate technical aspects and hopefully make some kind of comments about them that are worthwhile, that's not, what drives us, I think, is more the hermeneutics or the story. So, when you see a movie like this, and it's ADR in its original language, and it looks like a dubbed movie, and the lips don't always match up with the speed at which the words are being said. I mean, just right off the bat, I don't know how you can put that up there with The Godfather or with M, or where it's like the quality of production is just, it's different. Okay, so it doesn't. For me and for you, I think, Travis. Let me know if I'm speaking out of turn for you. But it doesn't make or break. We're not going to, have very harsh criticism against this movie for doing things like that. I don't have a problem with that, but I do kind of have a problem when the body of criticism has said that this belongs on some kind of altar when there's a kind of a glaring issue just in sound design. Yeah,
I think so. I totally agree. I don't know how much of that is up to the filmmakers. In this case, right? Because like when we talked about JCVD, we were like, people, if you're going to watch this, seek out the non-dubbed version for the love of all things holy. You know what I mean? But that's a 2008 movie or whatever that it just has no business being a dubbed film. Like I know the original audio for that exists. Just put the subtitles up and watch the movie. This era of filmmaking, especially in Italian filmmaking, I know this was carried throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and even to like the 70s and 80s, because Italian films were not made for just an Italian market. They were trying to make global money. This is a really common technique, and it doesn't make it good at all. Like you're saying, like it hampers the quality of the film immediately. I did forgive it more in this, Justin, than I did when we started watching the dubbed version of JCVD, because it's like, I don't know, something about old black and white, whatever. Like you kind of, I don't know, you get over it quicker, or maybe the dubbing's just not as bad. I don't know, but it's there, and it's certainly something that you will notice. And if nobody has like put that into consideration in its quality, it's kind of nuts, but I think there's also something in there that's like, it was just kind of par for the course for Italian films back then. It wasn't like, it wasn't as common for them to have, perfectly clean Italian audio tracks that were subtitled beautifully that now are going to persist, 80 years later almost. So I agree.
No, totally. And so to try to, condense my argument, I'm not suggesting that, because even in Russia, they're still doing ADR in like the 70s and 80s. Well, maybe not the 80s, but in the 70s at least, for a huge amount of their cinema, because it was just more affordable to do that way.
Yeah.
My contention is not just that it's ADR, it's that it's ADR'd with different actors.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't, like, there's no reason for, I get if you have a budget constraint, or you have, you're kind of thinking long term, you want to, sell to other markets. But what the heck are we doing by not letting the people that acted those roles are going to know how to match up their words with what they actually said?
Yeah, well, and here there's no excuse, right? It's not like it's Jimmy Stewart and Peter Lorre and Humphrey Bogart. It's like, get them back in the studio for a day to ADR their lines. It doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's where I stand.
I'm with you. And I also think the one interesting kind of fun fact behind the scenes of this, which has nothing to do with the way our conversation will bear out, I just found it and thought it was interesting. Sergio Leone worked as an assistant for the director during the filming of this movie. And apparently he's one of the priests that's standing next to Bruno and Antonio during the rainstorm, which is really interesting.
Really?
Yeah. So I thought of all the things to uncover under a rock, that's kind of interesting, because as far as Italian filmmakers going forward would go, he's probably the biggest deal of all of them, at least to the American market.
Big deal.
Yeah. And I like Sergio Leone. I think you do too.
Yes. That we'll leave that. That's the understatement of the episode.
Yeah, we'll have to do some spaghetti westerns in the future.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get into it. What's it saying? This is where we talk about all of the nuts and bolts and how was it put together? How was it acted? What is the story saying? And is any of it worth your time? Plot synopsis. Pretty simple. This is about a man who his bike is stolen. And this is post-war Italy, so work is hard to come by. The one job that comes up for him requires a bicycle. So the wife sells the sheets off of their bed in order for him to get his bike out of hock from the pawn shop. And it's shortly thereafter stolen. The bulk of the movie is him on a desperate hunt through again, post-war Italy and Rome, to find this bicycle, to get his livelihood back and his sense of hope and life back. And his son, Bruno, is at his side. That's the whole story, man. And I think, you know,
got it.
Yeah, you've got it on, again, one side of a napkin. Sometimes that's great, a la Asphalt Jungle. And sometimes in the case of this story, it just feels pretty redundant, I think is the word. And let's talk about maybe, I do think the performances are worth talking about because, yes, they're amateur actors. And sometimes that is just kind of, they serve their purpose. No, I don't feel like anybody in here is bad, even for being amateurs. But one person to me rises to the surface, and I'd like to talk about her first, and then we can get to the central character and sort of the meat of the story. Justin, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Maria, played by Leonela Carell. She's the one person in this movie who certainly I would love to see her given more to do. I can say that about everybody in the story. But every scene she has is really well put together on her part, in my mind. There's moments where, you know, he comes and he tells her, I found this job, but I have to have a bike. And why did we pawn the bike? And there's this great desperate energy that she plays off of in a really realistic way. Later on, after he loses the bike, there's a great nonverbal kind of silent sequence where he's asking someone to help him find the bike. She comes up and he has to tell her it's gone, you know, or whatever, what happened, it's gone. And they just walk away together in the midst of this crowd, and she doesn't really say anything, but she just has really like believable on-screen tears in her eyes. And I don't know, she made me feel the realness of this more than the lead character, and pretty much more than anyone else in the story. What did you think of her portrayal?
No, I'm right there with you, man. Sorry that I don't have really anything more complex to say than that, but she's very believable, and honestly, if this movie was centered around her, I think it might be a little more interesting.
Yeah.
And not just because of her acting chops, but just because of that role that she has. Like, I want to know what that lady's doing. This is I get that this is unfair, listeners, right? You can pine all you want for another movie, but that's not what we have. But just for the sake of argument, I would love to have known what is she like wringing her hands about, or not. I mean, because she does seem like a pretty productive lady,
right?
Trying to take care of her household as best as she can, not even really hesitating to get rid of their like prized or only bed sheets, or I don't know if that was part of wedding present or what, but.
Yeah, she said it was part of her dowry. Yeah, so.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, listeners. Actually, no, I was testing Travis. As we often, you know, it's like, hey, are you going to test me today? And we're like, yeah, I'm going to do it. So
I got a point.
He passed.
I'm marking it down in the point columns so that we can total
grab
them
a Snickers
up in 10
on the
years.
way out.
Yep, exactly.
Anyway, so she's willing to do whatever she can for her family, and I think that's at contrast to him. So if I can kind of pivot off that, Travis. So the beginning of this movie, everyone's looking for work. All the men of the city are in a throng together, waiting for like the work boss guy to come out and say, "Who's got work today?" Well, when the main character's name comes up, Ricci, that's my Italian accent, everybody. When he calls out for Antonio Ricci, Antonio Ricci's not in the crowd with all the guys.
Yeah.
He's off freaking sitting down looking like a bump on a log. And so you're left with this protagonist. Again, it's fine. I don't have a problem. Not every protagonist needs to be John Wayne in Not the Searchers, aka, you know, somebody that's like upstanding and noble. But you're given this guy that he really doesn't know what to do, and he's not really willing to do everything that he can to make amends for his family. You think about like what's a movie where we see that? Maybe Will Smith in Pursuit of Happiness.
Sure.
You know, just a guy that's like willing to go. I don't care what I have to do. I'm gonna provide. That's not really this guy's MO, and I mean that's real. Okay, not everyone's wired differently. I get it, but we just kind of are left with one note. I think largely because this character's impetus to kind of solve problems is pretty low, especially compared to his wife. So I think this would have been a more palpable and maybe a stronger movie, although I get we're in the dissenting category and most other people are going to maybe disagree with us if they've seen this movie, but I'd much rather spend time with Maria as she tries to figure out, how can I support my family? How can I get us through this, since my husband does very little? I mean, the only reason he has a job is because the government essentially said, like, hey, you can have a job. Go get your bike. So I just the contrast there, I think, might be worth noting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you mentioned something that I think, multiple times in my notes, which is it's such a conscious choice to depict people en masse and individually as part of a crowd, right? Like in every sequence of this movie, in almost every sequence of this movie, it's not singular person or two people having a scene of dialogue. It's always a crowd. You know what I mean? From moment one, there's this big crowd of people waiting to hear about jobs. In times where he's looking for the bike, or him and his son are running around town, or they are waiting to talk to the Holy One, as she's called. There's always a crowd. It's crowds. It's this idea of like society being organized in crowds and groups, and then obviously this movie is all about tackling people who are of lower class, of not much. That's the central character here, is obviously desperate for work, wanting to provide for his family, whether he is standing in line like the more desperate ones, or taking a nap over off the side. I do think that like the conscious choice to depict society as broken up into these massive blobs, these groups, it also is redundant, right? Like we see it a lot, but at the same time, it's at least consistent and purposeful. I think speaking of the Holy One, right? This character of this woman who I think is referred to in the cast list as the charitable lady. I think that's her name. She is this interesting part of the story that I wish. So this is a movie, right? Like we've said, it's redundant. We've said we wish it centered around the wife instead of the husband. Largely, like I wish this movie just tried to do a little bit more, because I think the thread of the story of his lost bike would be great if it was surrounded by a couple other things, like actually explore this idea of faith versus rationality, or something like that. The wife has already talked to this woman who's kind of I don't want to call her a fortune teller, because she appeals to God. So she's more of like a prophet or a wise person. I don't know. And she has given this piece of information to Maria, saying like he's going to find a job. Basically, she affirms that. And then he does. So she thinks, okay, this woman was right. I need to go pay her due or whatever. And then is there a comment in there on like is this a ruse? Is she giving people fortune cookie answers to their questions and then wanting money? It's a little confused and a little confuddled in there, but there's something about religion and faith and his skepticism of it, because the two times we see him in direct proximity to a place that signifies faith is the wise woman's apartment, where he is like, no, we're not going to pay for this. Let's go. He calls his wife like a dumb woman, essentially, for wanting to spend money on this. And then later on, we see him in this mass, this almost like a homeless shelter, right? Like all these people go to mass and they shave up and they say the ritualistic chants or whatever, the mass, they recite the mass, and then they get to eat. That's the motivation for them being there. And he's not there to do any of that. He's not there to have any, he's not there to pay respects or show any decorum for the process. He's there to find this old guy and drag him out of there, no matter whether he disturbs it or not. Did you find any threads to pull out, Justin, as far as like a conversation surrounding faith and rationality or anything like that?
Sort of. Let me know. I'll try to give you my answer, and then you feel free to keep me on task if it's not pertinent enough. But it just seems like a lot of this movie is about one man's confrontation with complete failure on every level, and it's not just his failure to I don't know, keep track of his bicycle or figure out how to get a job elsewhere or do whatever needs to be done. But so he's confronted with, okay, here's your job. You can start tomorrow, but you have to have a bicycle. So from the beginning, it's like, the state is saying, hey, yeah, we'll help you out. We can give you money and, whatever, but You need to provide essentially the critical component for making this work.
Yeah.
So and so when he loses his bicycle, there's no welfare office or just you can't go to his employer and be like, guys, my bike got stolen. If that happened, it might be worth noting later to talk, or we just mention it now. Post-war America, a lot more optimistic, a lot more hopeful, a lot more money floating around. If that guy had that job in New York or something, probably the boss would be like, hey, no problem, just come borrow my bike or whatever.
Yeah, or get you another bike or something.
Right, like not a big deal. But here it's just like the state's like, no, man, you're screwed. You don't have a bike, you don't have a job.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, the state's not really here to help me. So then he's left with society, who's just out to get. He confronts the guy that he knows stole his bike. And again, society comes out as a mob against him.
Yep.
Like, hey, no, dude, he's a great man. Everyone knows him in this neighborhood. We don't know you. Get out of here. And so, and then he, when he in the end, we can jump ahead a little bit just for this point anyway. He tries to steal a bicycle at the very end, and of course is caught immediately by society that actually wants to work together. So he feels like, I think that society is it's at odds with, there's a failure of society to actually care for him. All they can do is beat him up.
Right.
And then you have the church that also fails him. The closest thing you get to that is, or a non-failure, is the charitable lady. Right. Who gives him like advice that is very, fortune cookie, like you're either going to find your bike or you're not. It's that simple. And then he goes outside and he sees the guy immediately that stole his bike. So it's, if you're leaving that scene thinking like this lady's full of it, then you walk outside and he's right there. It's like, oh, okay, well, I don't know, maybe. I think it's purposefully vague and you can read into it what you will there. But when you contrast that, when he goes to the church, and they're like shaving these guys, which, hey, that's great. And they're going to give them food. Awesome. Very cool things, as a church should do, right? Trying to help those that are less fortunate in its community. But then they're shaving the old guy that he thinks he saw with the guy that stole his bike. And our main character watches as this guy gets shaved. And then someone comes in from the church and says, hey, what are you doing? The priest is waiting. No, that's good enough. So the guy can't even finish getting shaved. Yeah. They just kick him out of the chair. So the church is not really interested in actually helping. They're just interested in some kind of pretense. It's the same thing when the main character is in the church and he's arguing with this old man and, kind of verging on disrupting the service and then sort of disrupting the service.
Yeah.
You have these young men in suits that are, very well put together, obviously of a higher class in society, coming up and they're like, hey, what are you doing, man? You got to stop that. This is church. And it's like, okay, again, if the church is here to help, that'd be a great opportunity to take that and be like, hey, man, I don't know what's going on, but like, can you step out here and let me know? Maybe there's something we can do to help you, but why don't you come out here? Instead, it's just like, no, dude, hey, just like when you're out in society, just like when you're working for the state, toe the freaking line when you're in here, okay? And so there's no, it's just another kind of superstructure without any love. Yeah. So this guy, except in his family, there is no love. Obviously, Maria loves him. His son, even though they're going through a stressful time, there is still love there. There's none of it anywhere else, and I think that's this character's big crux that he's got to get through.
Yeah, I'm just working through it as we're talking, but it seems to me that like the thing that was really apparent, right, over and over again is like there's the haves and the have-nots, and there's moments in the movie where that's like blatantly played on. That's the whole point of the scene. And then there's authority structures and people like the protagonist, Antonio, right? And all the authority structures are looked to as deficient, as corrupt, I would say is pretty safe, and as incompetent, right? Like you have the police multiple times in this movie, he goes to file his report and the police officer is just like, you filed your report, you did it, go away, essentially. And then later on, the police officer who he finds in that mob of people you referred to is like, well, I believe you, basically, but they're just going to back him up, so I got to go, And then, right. And the church can be held, again, I'm thinking in real time here, but the church in this movie really is portrayed. It can be held just alongside any of those other government, police, church, like all those authority structures are really just there to be an impedance for actual justice or help or mercy or anything, because the whole point of this story, which it won't let you forget, sequence after sequence after sequence, with the exception of a couple, is that like this guy is beaten down, right? Society and culture and authority all around him has just chewed him up and spit him out, and there's no hope for him. It's so incredibly bleak, right? Are there moments in this movie that succeed in that depiction of like have and have not, and others that don't? Or does it all just kind of muddle together in a mushy oatmeal for you?
No, the oatmeal is very distinct. It's Quaker oats before you've put any moisture in them.
Steel cut, of course. Yes.
My dad liked to have Quaker oats sometimes in the morning, just dry, and he'd just put honey on them.
What the heck?
In a coffee cup.
This coming from, didn't you have a grandpa who just ate mayonnaise off a spoon?
Yeah, oh yeah, Grandpa Dan, big into that. You catch him in the kitchen like at 5 a.m., or 4. I mean, he gets up really early. It's crazy. Not that 5 is really early, but I'm talking like 3:30. He's playing his guitar. It's like, okay, trying to sleep, Grandpa, but it is your house. Whatever. But yeah, you catch him in the. He'll have a cup of black coffee.
Oh yeah,
and a spoonful of mayonnaise.
Heavens.
Not a teaspoon. We're talking fat. You get the fat serve the soup spoon.
America. Yes.
And yeah, I guess, man. I don't know. He thinks it's great, so I don't know. He's getting his fats that way, I guess. I don't know. Very
go.
keto of him.
Yeah.
But
he was keto before keto was cool. That's all it is.
Yeah, man. He's the progenitor of it all. Anyway, it is distinct. I think I'll give the movie that. It's only fair. It's that scene when they go to eat at that restaurant that they probably can't afford. And his son Bruno keeps looking over at that table with that young girl that's probably his age. And it's to this movie's credit that it's just so easy, even with black and white. Not a lot of lighting that's really technical. The way that shot is framed to that family that's not them at the table.
Yeah.
Just the way they're eating, the clothes they're wearing, the expressions on their face all indicate without any kind of, no one's wearing the Pope's robes, okay? But
right.
You can just tell though that family has a heck of a lot more money than Antonio and his son. So I think that's really well done. You do get, haves and have-nots, absolutely. They have to go pawn their stuff.
Yeah.
So that's not a normal thing, hopefully, for people to have to do.
I really like that restaurant sequence of almost anything in the movie, because something that this movie really lacks that would make it not so much of a punishing experience, right? Of just being beaten over the head with this idea of he's screwed, is he throws caution to the wind, right? Like you said, they probably can't afford this restaurant. His line before they go in there is, "Why kill myself worrying when I'll end up just as dead anyway?" This is a great line.
Yeah.
It feeds into this scene where he actually he orders a thing of wine, and they order this food that is it's not exorbitant, but it's just enough to fill their bellies, Yeah. And him and his son get to smile at each other for a moment. And, what bums me out about the movie is he doesn't do anything with that idea, right? That idea of why kill myself worrying when I'll end up just as dead anyway? Well, what happens in the next sequence? He goes right back to frantically running around like he's in the middle of a Twilight Zone episode looking for this bike, and the rest of the movie just plays out like that. I think there's just little brief moments where you could see, like what you said, this movie could try to hit more than one note, and if it did, it might be one of the greatest movies of all time for me. It might be a beautiful depiction of that post-war poverty, but you see the enduring inherent hope that people who do survive have to hold on to. It really doesn't give you a lot of that, and that's what makes it's really freaking heavy for an hour and 29 minutes.
Well, and it's heavy without, to be clear, listeners, we don't, Travis and I, if it's a heavy movie, it's a heavy movie, and that's okay if it earns it. Let's bring up the old standby, Schindler's List, okay?
Yeah.
It's fine. No one is, please don't sugarcoat the Holocaust for me. Don't try to give that a happy ending, because there isn't one. And that story earns it. This is a story about a guy that his bike gets stolen. Okay?
Right.
And so my big contention I have with this movie is, yes, many a working person, including myself, maybe not to the level that this character experiences it, But there are absolutely desperate things that happen to the working person, okay? Especially in a society where there's not, welfare available readily in a church that's competent or whatever. But to indulge in the idea that losing his bicycle is like the end of his life, that's not reality. It's not reality for this guy, even though the movie tries to portray it that way. And it shouldn't be reality anywhere. Like this is the guy that was sitting out twiddling his thumbs while everyone else is actually standing in line ready for work. So there are things that this guy could do to go find work at other places. I'm sure of it, because that exists in just about any society. And so you have a character who is so solipsistic, who so can't see beyond his own kind of myopic worldview and means, that losing his bicycle really is he has such a not holistic view of reality, I think, that losing a bicycle for him is really like, oh, I might have to kill myself.
Right.
Well, no, guys, he's not going through the Holocaust, okay? If you're going to kill yourself, that might be a place where you really consider it, and that's legit. I get that life is really hard sometimes, and there are absolutely stressors with providing for a family, even in a society that's fully functional and not in post-war Europe. But to say that, like, that's just, boy, life is so rough. If you lose your bicycle, good luck to you. Like, no, there is still hope in life. That is not the scenario to hang your hat on for an hour-and-a-half movie and tell people, life just kind of blows. So I don't know how you could be a person that has had a similar experience to this guy and made it through and not killed yourself over losing your bicycle, whatever your bicycle may be in reality, and be like, wow, this is brilliant. Because it's not. It's kind of a lie. Like, this guy, although he's never given it, right? He's never given the love or the encouragement from anyone like, hey man, it's going to be all right. We'll figure this out. He doesn't even have the internal drive, to be like, okay, I guess I'll figure it out. With the way this movie ends, Travis, although it's like, it's pseudo hopeful, at best, because I would not be surprised if this movie tacked on an ending beyond the last scene in the real movie, where he just goes and like gets run over by a train on purpose. It's like that you're not really led to believe that there's any kind of closure. And again, you don't need closure for a movie. I'm not trying to say this movie needs to end happy. But for the stakes being so low, and yes, I get that the movie is, I think, trying to make a point that the stakes are low, but they become really high because society is so bad. Yeah. But it just doesn't, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's intellectually honest.
Yeah. Well, okay. Before we get away from the restaurant sequence totally, I have two questions that I don't have an answer for, and I hope you might. So these are not really theme related like what we were just talking about, but I just want to know if you have any way of getting to the bottom of these things better than I do. First one is in the restaurant sequence. What is that song? Like, I can't figure out if by watching it that it is like some cheeky idea of like mommy slept with the mailman, or if it's just straight up hardcore racist. And I can, either way, it just like comes out of nowhere. Like, they're singing and it's one of those moments, Justin, that we've talked about where we're like, oh, music in a movie, this is great. And then the last line of the song is like, who is this little boy? Who is this little boy? Well, he's a black boy. How did he end up that way? And I was like, whoa, what? Do you have an answer for me?
I only have my interpretation, which is that, it's a racist little song.
Oh my gosh.
It seems incongruous that we're so quick to just, quote unquote, cancel movies and people and things for not aligning with certain cultural norms of the day, and then allow things like this to be held in classic status.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute. This also has what you say you hate, what cannot be tolerated. But, but everyone says it's good, so it's good. So I find that's a little aside.
No, I'm with you. I think, like, it is that, right? Like, no matter which way you take the lyrics, it is so brazenly racist and just off the cuff that, like, you can't give it a pass. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not, again, we did a whole hour and 45 on Gone with the Wind, and how do we digest that beast, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of nuance and truth required to take art of this age and of any age that has, again, remnants of something that was socially acceptable that is thankfully no longer socially acceptable. But yeah, I agree. Like I would be bummed out if we got through this conversation without being like, oh, by the way, that song in the restaurant was crazy racist, and now moving on. Because it's not the movie's worst offense, but it is an offense, for goodness sakes. Like, what the heck? Yeah. Anyway, my second question, for which I have no answer, but I fear that you might have an answer that I'm afraid of.
No.
Who is the creepy bell guy when they're looking for bike parts and they're trying to find the bike and they're looking through the like market with all the like bike stuff? There's this freaking creepy guy next to Bruno who's like, "Oh, you like the way this bell rings? Would you like one of these bells?" He's all up in his what is that?
Yeah, he's a pedophile. I think it's pretty clear. I'm not trying to be funny. I think it's like the way that they dress him with those glasses and the way he wears his hat. And his posture, just the face that they cast, I think just like there's very good deliberation in trying to make that family that the Richies are sitting next to look very superior.
Yeah.
There is no question that this guy is a predatory sex offender.
So why? What's the purpose of it?
I don't know that there's a great reason for it, Travis, because it's blink and then it's like gone after 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But I think it's just to indicate that society is failing, not just Antonio, but it just fails all of those people of that class.
Yeah.
Right? So Bruno, no one gives an F, right? There's two other guys just standing there selling the parts, and they're like, "Hey, creepy dude, get lost, man.
Yeah.
What are you doing?" They're just like, whatever's going to happen is what's going to happen. And honestly, if that guy tried to take Bruno away, they'd probably be like, whatever, Italy, you know? Which I just say to be flippant. I have nothing against Italians. So it's clear.
It is though. It's one of those things that like if this movie bothered to handle the idea of the breakdown of post-war Italian society with a more deft hand or a little bit more layers than just this poor guy lost his bike, then you could probably earn a subplot like that, right? Like it's not. Yeah. Think about M, right? M is literally that story. It's about a creepy, predatory guy, and what do they do with it? They make you think about that person as a human being. In this case, it's like it gave me the willies, and then it was over, and essentially, apart from that, serves no real purpose. And that is
right.
If anything in this movie is exploitative, I think things like that are perfectly indicative of it, right? It's like, what, are you just going to just like throw in the idea that this creepy dude, you know, for no real reason other than like, well, people like that, sometimes they're around, and then you're like moving on to find the bike. It just felt flippant, you know what I mean? And that's not material that you can be flippant with. I think that's my main
No,
conclusion.
it's not. I totally agree, man. I another martial arts movie that I've seen with Jet Li. Oh man, what is this movie called? It's from the 80s when Jet Li was rather young-ish. Holy crap, I'm not going to be able to remember the name.
I'll find it.
But
keep talking.
So Jet Li, his character, right? He to to help his two friends get through
Shaolin
these
Temple. Kids from Shaolin.
No.
Born to Defense. Dragon Fight.
Wait. Something with Shaolin.
Martial Arts of Shaolin.
Yes, okay. Martial Arts of Shaolin.
There
That's
it. Thanks, IMDb.
Okay. Incredible choreography. Not a very good movie overall.
Okay.
Unfortunately, but I mean, dude, it's like the athleticism of the people involved in these movies is just off the charts nuts. It's crazy. Anyway, like people doing backflips from like sitting down, and it's like, what's happening? How do
that when I get up to get a cup of coffee? I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh wow, man, I need to come to your house more often. Jet Li is trying to get his two friends through these government checkpoints because the government's looking for them. So it's a ridiculous movie. So he buys a bunch of sheep, and he dresses his two friends up as sheep, and they just kind of mingle in with the herd. Or
sounds like a Pink Panther bit.
No, it totally is, man. And the movie is like, you know, it does try to be really goofy, including with the sheep and with what happens next, where Jet Li tries to dress up like as a shepherdess, not a shepherd. I don't know why. I guess for comedy. And there's like, okay, so they're at this government checkpoint, and this guy is guarding, one of these government, and the government is shown to be corrupt, and kind of a similar note, not nearly as dark as this movie we're talking about. But there's all these government guys there and like, yeah, okay, hey, give us you go get lost. And then this other guy's like, oh, you look cute, and he just takes a lady and like brings her inside, and we're like, what? At first you're like, okay, are they questioning her? Are they? But then, it's made very clear when Jet Li's quote-unquote shepherdess shows up and that guy's like, oh, you look good. And he runs out and grabs Jet Li and forcibly takes her back, her back, right? And it's like, oh, the idea is he's just raping all these people? What does this do? I thought 5 seconds ago we were laughing about sheep. And then Jet Li, fights him and comes out with his shirt torn. So there's but... To your same point, Travis, you can't. That doesn't work at all in that movie, as it doesn't work in this movie in a very different way. You can't deal with things like rape is not funny.
Yeah.
Being a pedophile, not funny at all. So we may not need to. Every movie that deals with those things doesn't necessarily need to deal with it like M does, to that degree. But if you're not going to take it seriously and like as a sacred part of just living on the planet, like that, people have some kind of dignity and don't need to be violently sexually violated. That's not like we need to press pause on making the movie and go back and like maybe look in the mirror and say, okay, what is my worldview? What am I doing?
Yeah.
And so I totally agree with you that massive aside.
Irresponsibly handled. It's just so clearly irresponsibly handled. Let's talk about something that's not irresponsibly handled, which is the camera work. I mean, of all the things, of all the things to pick apart, man, this looks great. One thing that critics I think always get right about this movie is it really does have moment after moment where you could just freeze frame it, and like a still is just, makes the best use of black and white. All of these locations are real. There's no sets here, so they all look tangible. And when when the director is trying to make use of the city space and how desperate and hopeless the search for the bicycle is, you just get that sense of area and bigness of the buildings and smallness of the man. Not to mention, the crowds of people where he's kind of encompassed in these crowds and he's just folded into these big swaths of people. There's a couple shots in particular that I found to be really just jaw-droppingly good. The one is the framed shot of him and his son when they come out of the wise woman's house for the second time. It's just like the frame of the doorway. It creates this perfect, almost theater-like proscenium frame around them, and he sits on that for a while. That's just nice. And then it's just photographed really slickly. It's a shame that this eye, right, like the beautiful construction of these, it doesn't add up to more layered storytelling, more than just that redundant banging in the drum of this guy's screwed, like we've been talking about. What did you think about the look of the movie?
It's beautiful. It's a shame because like Kubrick, I think the folks involved here have a real eye for making, everything you mentioned with Barry Lyndon, everything kind of looks like a oil painting. In this movie, you're just left with things that look like, just about every shot could be a cover for like Time magazine or Life from the 40s.
Yeah.
It's just really, it's beautiful to look at, but unfortunately that's not, it's just such a shame. I think I'd rather have a movie, and I guess this is biased, but I'd rather have a movie that has something to say that's very strong and maybe not shot as competently than the inverse problem, because it feels kind of wasted in this sense. Like, I do get, like you, I get lost in some of those shots or certain close-ups. It's like, wow, that's great. But then 5 seconds later, it's like, oh yeah, pedophile guy. Or, just like, oh yeah, he's still bummed about not finding his bike and won't do anything else. So yes, I totally agree. The cinematography is great, but it can't hold up the movie by itself.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk about the ending since we're nearing the end of our What's It Saying section. I think we might have slightly different readings on the ending, and it's not to say that like I think the ending redeems it or makes it all work or better or anything. But here's what I think, sort of akin to what we said about Maria, right? Like if the movie was centered around her, or maybe there's that portrayal or what they give her to do is more compelling for the screen time she has. I mean, I think it's pretty telling. We haven't really talked about Antonio's performance throughout this whole conversation because he's fine, but like he's so given one thing to do 100,000 times, right? So it's not really the actor's fault. I think he shines when they give him some levity in the restaurant scene, and when he has other stuff to do other than run around frantically. It really does kind of feel like, like I said, like a Twilight Zone protagonist who's frantic for a half hour works really well in a lot of ways. And this is an hour and a half of basically that same thing 3 times over, but the son, okay, so Bruno, he's at his side for much of the movie. I kept noticing just as a parent and, I'm trying to put myself in this character's shoes, Justin, and I'm sure you were too, right? A father who's trying to provide for his family, who, I've been through times where like money's been tight, obviously, or like don't know what we're going to do next month, some similar stuff. I'm not talking post-war Italian poverty, but I could try to put myself in this character's shoes. And I just kept noticing that Bruno and him are together, and yet he's not ever holding his hand. He's not ever keeping a real close eye on him, especially when they're looking for bike parts, but we'll leave that aside because we've already covered it. But like there's times where they're walking down these crowded streets or he's running after someone to find out more information about the bike, and his son is just trailing, just paces and paces behind him. Like when they're leaning up against that wall and the German priests are there because it's raining, and then the rain kind of subsides, he sees the guy on the bike and he runs after him. He doesn't even say, "Come on, Bruno." Bruno's just like looking at him like, I guess I'll run now. And then he hops on after him, right? There's this distance between them, right? There's this distance, and it comes to a head in a scene where, he gets angry and lashes out and he hits his son. His son is obviously physically and emotionally shattered by this. He's just hurt, and they have to kind of have this coming back together moment at the restaurant. The ending to me feels like the ending of a better movie in the sense that the one moment you get with them where they are hand in hand walking in total unity, it doesn't come because he found the bike, right? It doesn't come because he found this envelope of money or everything turned around for the better. The movie might be better with a happy ending and not this ambiguously hopeful one. But I do find some solace in the idea that like if I watch this from Bruno is the protagonist, and that's not how it's designed, but I'm just trying to make it better for me, then this is a son who is learning how the world works, who is learning the ins and outs of society about making a way for yourself. This kid works at a gas station, and he's like 9 years old, and he's trying to work out reality in the world around him. And what does he look up to as a father right now, right? He looks up to a father who is obsessing and desperate, and all of his hopes and fears are pinned on this idea of finding this stolen bike. And in the end, when he sees his father succumb to the temptation of continuing the cycle that caused him all this anguish, right? He sees a bike. He's in it. They're sitting there outside the Coliseum, and you can hear the roar of the crowd, right? Another one of those crowds, another one of those moments where the haves and the have-nots are so clear. These two sitting on the sidewalk, the crowd in the Coliseum who have paid for a ticket and are being entertained and are living possibly their best life. And then he sees the bike, and I really, really wanted him not to take the bike. I don't know how you felt, Justin, but like if this movie did something there and he decided all of this is not going to be fixed by me continuing this cycle of evil, right, towards people. If I take a bike, I've stolen someone else's bike. I made the same 2 days for them that I've just been through. He does it. He gets caught. He gets let off. And the last shot of the movie, for me, is him and Bruno walking hand in hand, again, being enfolded into that same crowd. They haven't really gone anywhere, like you said, but if you look at it from the kid's perspective, he at least has his father's hand in his hand, and they have each other, as trite as that might read in this movie. To me, it's like, well, that is something worth saying. I don't know. What did you think of the ending? The bike being stolen by the protagonist, the son, the last shot, all of it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that interpretation, and I would agree with a lot of it, except that it doesn't work for me because he stole the bike.
Yeah.
If he chose, and I'm not saying that because, obviously stealing bikes is wrong, but I'm saying if he made that choice, if this character actually, meaning the protagonist, actually made some kind of character development and progress, and there was just, even if it's nonverbal, if you just got the idea that, you know what, he's finally realized it's not the bike.
Yeah.
That's not my salvation. I'm not going to be saved by the bike, whether it's mine or someone else's. And he goes, okay, Bruno, you know what? Whatever, man. We don't have to look for the bike anymore. Let's go home. Just something to indicate the character has moved on. Then that hand-holding means everything.
Right.
Because then the son has something to hang on to, and so does that character. He realizes that's what matters. That's what binds me to this, keeps my feet rooted to the ground. Let me go figure something else out. But instead, it's better than having them not walk hand in hand at the end. But because he stole the bike and because his son is like, oh man, is dad about to go to jail? And why did my dad just steal something? I know that's wrong. It's not, and I get that this movie is not trying to be clean. It is trying to indulge in its messiness or quote unquote realism. But it just seems kind of sadistic. It at least for a viewer. I don't have a problem with movies that are dark. I know my wife likes to tell me I only like sad stories, but this is just not. It's not appropriate. I don't think it doesn't earn anything that it's trying to do, at least in my opinion.
All right. Well, let's get into our wrap up. Is it worth your time? Justin, why don't you kick it off? Is it worth people's time? How often would you rewatch it? Give them the whole scoop.
Well, try to make it a short little bite of gelato. This is not. It's mint. This is if you're somebody that has to see all the classics, quote unquote, or whatever. I'd encourage you to. Right there's a lot of good stuff out there. But when you do that, like with this movie, I just encourage listeners, come to your own conclusions.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you have to be, beholden to, just like with great authors or great paintings or great music, so-called. Hey, if you don't like it, it's art. It's supposed to be subjective. So as long as you have a compelling reason and you can, back your reasons up somehow, not just, I didn't like it. That's not really a reason, We've tried to lay out some reasons why it doesn't, at least in our opinion, deserve the status that it currently holds. But that's just our opinion too. So feel free to disagree and shoot us a really angry email or however they get a hold of us on social media.
Carry your pigeon. Always carry your pigeon.
Yeah, smoke signals are fine. Just, Morse code or something. I wouldn't rewatch this again. It's just not that, like you said, Travis, you said it's fine. That's what it is. It's a fine movie. There's some really great shots. It is saying something. I don't think that it really is genuine. Because this is not really reality, even then. And this is so-called a forerunner of the neo-realist movement. This is not really reality, except for somebody that's really kind of mentally unstable because they needed just to get help from a priest or from a therapist or from somebody. So, for me, this would probably be the only time I watch it. How about for you?
For me, it's kind of a classic example of missed opportunities because I actually, you pointed out that these are non-actors, and that's true. They're amateurs. They're not, big names or anything. I don't think that's working against it. I think if you had given this cast some really, I don't know, like Casablanca level scripting, I think they would have been okay, especially in their own voices and non-ADR'd with other random people. I also think that the stuff we pointed out about other characters being more compelling for different reasons, if this was a story that was balanced around the whole family, the mother, the central character Antonio, and really Bruno, kind of more in equal measure, more perspectives here, then it wouldn't feel like this hammer smacking the anvil of class warfare and poverty with such a grating effect on me. The redundancy of the storytelling and the hopelessness and the lack of agency that they really saddle the leading character with make it a really a really punishing experience to view. It's sad, and it's static, from moment one to moment end. It doesn't, you don't get to see these characters move anywhere. So if you just, like I said, put this thing in a martini shaker and just made it more about the whole family, the dad could be obsessing over the bike, but he's not the whole movie. Make it more about how is Bruno coming into the world in this particular time period. What is mom up to, and what are her thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires? And then you make him not steal the bike at the end and really make a conscious choice. And you make the holding of the hands in the final sequence, like you said, mean everything and not as little as it really ends up meaning. I think you do have a top tier film in cinema history here. But for me, in its current package, it's just okay. And it's really, at times, disingenuous in its messaging. Even though it does have strong, solid, consistent messaging, it falls flat and weirdly disingenuous at times for all the reasons we outlined. So I wouldn't watch it again because it doesn't pay off. You know what I mean? In the end, it doesn't pay off. It's not one of those sad stories that you think, oh man, I've lived a day in someone else's shoes and now I understand them better, because like you said, I don't think I understand any real people better. I think I just understand the construct of a person that they put forth in this movie. So it's worth your time if you're a film completist, but yeah, hold the critics loosely with this one, people, because it's not the scoop of gelato it's cracked up to be. So let's.
It's not even mint.
It's not even
even dry oats, dude.
It's not even mayonnaise spoon. All right, well, we've run through just about all the greasy and sad streets of Italy, Justin. We can check that one off, but it's not a real gratifying check mark.
Not really.
Yeah.
You're just like kind of cleaning your toilet. Like, well, it's clean now. Move on to the next.
Yes, bicycle thieves, like cleaning a toilet. Next week, though, I have a feeling we're going to have a little bit more fun because we get to see our old pal Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah.
Rope, 1948. I think it should be fun, Justin. I hope you're excited.
I am. I'll see you there.
Let the movie speak.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.